fair plan. Well, that's another issue.
It's a non-starter.
First of all, you don't even know how many hostages are left.
They got some chutzpah calling it an Israeli plan.
Israel called it a non-starter.
Yep.
What happens to Hamas?
Well, you know, I'd like to see Hamas destroyed as much as anyone else, but they're all Hamas.
What?
They're all Hamas, all 2 million of them. So it's great if you want to destroy Hamas, but it's all of them. Yeah. So you kill the 30,000 they have, they just have another 30,000 ready to take their spot.
Every orphan coming out of this war is another Hamas soldier.
Right. So you either have to give them what they want, or come up with a way to make sure that October 7th never happens again. But we thought we already had that. And, you know, they could do it from the West Bank, too. And, you know, that's what my next book is about.
The West Bank?
Really?
Yeah. Hopefully by the end of the summer I'll be done. But,
That's exciting.
yeah. No one bought the first one, so I'm writing another one.
We did. That was a beautiful service.
Last night?
Yeah.
It's nice, right?
Yeah.
All right. What are we doing? Ah, it's time.
Is at least who's her parents?
Dave and Karen.
It is David.
Yeah, lawyer.
I know David. He's a really nice guy.
Wonderful guy. Yeah, wonderful. 26, 3. Okay. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
You're in for some good stuff today. I mean, you always are. I mean, except when I'm not here. But no, right. No, I'm just kidding. Then it's good too. But this is really neat. It's really all right. We'll get to it. We have to sing first.
Call it singing.
V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledorotam berit olam V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledorotam berit olam Beini u'bein b'nei Yisrael Oti le'olam, oti le'olam V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam U'bayom hashvi Shabbat v'nafash Shabbat v'nafash Shabbat v'nafash v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Okay. Okay, Torah study blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, so today what I want to show you is an 800-year-old explanation of a 2,600-year-old prediction. So that's pretty good, right? I mean, you know, let me say it one more time. So an 800-year-old explanation of a prediction from 2,600 years ago. Okay. So what I mean by that is that it is a leap year, so the Torah portion is Bechukotai. If it wasn't a leap year, we would read Bechukotai with last week's Torah portion, Bahar Bechukotai, which is the end of Leviticus. And then next week, when we're done today, we say Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek. And then move on next week to Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. But the book of Leviticus ends with one of the two times in the Torah where we get what's called the Tochachot. The Tochachot means the admonitions, all the horrible things that will happen to you if you don't follow the mitzvahs. And it's really terrible. It's so terrible that when you read them during services, when you're chanting Torah, you usually do it in a lighter voice. Because you don't want if you heard it in a full voice, it would harm your soul so much, the horrible things that would happen to the Jewish people if we didn't follow the mitzvahs. And by the way, we've experienced it. We know what it's like. Because if you look at the different things that are explained, it's happened a few times where the Jewish people have been punished to a point that's beyond belief. Now, this is the first time we have it in Bechukotai. The second time we have the admonitions, and they're pretty similar, is at the end of the Torah, towards the end of the Torah, in a Torah portion called Kitavo. It's like the third or fourth to last one in Deuteronomy, last Torah portion in Deuteronomy. Now, if you look at the list, they look pretty similar. All the bad things that'll happen to you, but there's some slight differences. And if you look at the slight differences, you can make some distinctions and try to figure out maybe what are they talking about. Okay. Now, let's try to make clear that the Torah ends when Moses dies, before the Jewish people ever get to the land of Israel. So, if these two times that the Torah talks about all the horrible things that are going to happen, they're based on the Jewish people being exiled. That's what's going to happen to you. So they're predictions of what would happen to you once you get to the land of Israel after Moses dies. So not in the Torah times, right? After Moses dies, meaning maybe the rest of the Tanakh. When you've gotten to the land, you didn't fulfill the mitzvahs, and then you got kicked out. And you don't have to have a PhD in Jewish history to know that that's exactly what happened, right? We got there, we built a beautiful temple, and we got kicked out. Not once, twice. Okay. Now we're back again. And it's a little different, but we're back. Okay. So what you could then say is, these predictions that we're about to read, they came true. Now, if you're one of these documentary hypothesis people, you could say, well, of course they came true. They were written in the time that the first temple was destroyed. So when you go back to the Torah and you say, well, the Torah was written at a much, much later date and the first temple was destroyed, and they're writing in the Torah, someday you're going to be exiled. It's a genius, right? You know, But if you believe in the Torah, and for a variety of other reasons, it doesn't seem to make much sense. Because who would buy it if it was just being written right then? You know, I mean, the book says this was written by Moses. But I know you just hit the stands today? Moses has been around for 1,000 years. It's only coming out now? It doesn't make a lot of, it's tough to buy. Why would anyone believe it? Okay, anyway. Now, do you remember last week when we talked about Bahar? We talked about Shemitah. What's Shemitah? Yes, the land rests in the 7th year. I don't know if you remember, a few weeks ago, we had the Torah portion of Emor. And Emor lists the different, we didn't really cover it because it's a different part of the Torah portion. But at the end of Emor, which we'll get to in 2 more years, or triennial. At the end of Emor, they talk about the different Jewish holidays. All the biblical holidays, they list them all. But we already know about them. We've already learned about them earlier in the Torah. So why do we learn about them again? Because in Emor, we learn about the connection between the the holidays, and the land of Israel. Right? You know, they become agricultural holidays, which is a weird thing. Because Passover doesn't happen in the land of Israel. Sukkot is when they're wandering in the wilderness. Shavuot is at Mount Sinai. These are holidays that have nothing to do with the land of Israel. But when you get to Leviticus, it connects the holiday. You can't do the holidays specifically without the land of Israel. So we learned that. Then we come to Shemitah, and we see in Shemitah that if you don't take care of the land and you don't give the land a Shabbat every 7th year, then the land doesn't work anymore. If the land doesn't work anymore, you can't really do the holidays, and you can't really be Jewish. You can't be Jewish without the land of Israel. That's the point that Leviticus is making. And now, once we've learned all that, we get to the punishments. Clear so far? Okay, now, what's the connection between the punishments and Shemitah? So what I mean by that is, what's the difference, what's the connection between all the punishments that will happen and you Jews using the land incorrectly? There's a direct connection. What is it? Well, we don't know. We haven't read it yet. But that's what we're trying to figure out. So what I want to look at with you today is, why are Bahar and Bechukotai, these 2 Torah portions, connected together? Which means to say, why is it that first we learn how to take care of the land, and then we learn what happens to us if we don't take care of the land? We know the answer. We get kicked out. But how does that all work? Okay. Clear so far? All right, so there's a lot going on, but I brought Nachmanides, he's going to make it make sense to us. All right, so we're up to the beginning of Bechukotai, Leviticus chapter 26, verse 3. The Torah portion starts in verse 3. Now, it's one thing to not have the Einspruchs. But when the Rosenthals also are out of town, it's almost like, why bother? You know what I mean. It's like, how can we even do this? But all right, we've dealt with this hurdle before. We'll deal with it again. All right, Bill, would you mind taking us into the here?
3?
Yeah.
If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, I will grant your rains in their season, so that the earth shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field their fruit.
Okay, so do you see right away there's a connection between doing the mitzvahs, doing what God wants, and the land working? Because how does the land not work if there's no rain? So there's a connection right away. There's a connection right away between our behavior and the reaction of the land of Israel. Now, you could do all the mitzvahs that you want living here in Florida. It's not going to affect the weather. This is all about the holiness of the land of Israel. Okay, let's keep going.
Your threshing shall overtake the vintage, and your vintage shall overtake the sowing. You shall eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land. I will grant peace in the land, and you shall lie down untroubled by anyone. I will give the land respite from vicious beasts, and no sword shall cross your land. You shall give chase to your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. 5 of you shall give chase to 100, and 100 of you shall give chase to 10,000, and your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. I will look with favor upon you, and make you fertile and multiply you, and I will maintain my covenant with you. You shall eat old grain long stored, and you shall have to clear out the old to make room for the new. I will establish my abode in your midst, and I will not spurn you. I will be ever present in your midst. I will be your God, and you shall be my people. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out from the land of the Egyptians to be their slaves no more, who broke the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect. But if you do not obey me and do not observe all these commandments, if you reject my laws and spurn my rules, so that you do not observe all my commandments, and you break my covenant, I in turn will do this to you. I will wreak misery upon you, consumption and fever, which cause the eyes to pine and the body to languish. You shall sow your seed to no purpose, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you. You shall be rooted by your enemies, and your foes shall dominate you. You shall flee, though none pursue.
Okay. I mean, there's so many sermons here. I don't even know where to start. I mean, there's so much going on here. But I'm going to try to stick to the plan. Okay, so verse 16 is where I want to focus. Then I too will do this to you. I will assign over you panic and the wasting away and fever, causing eyes to pine and souls to feel anguish. You will sow your seed in vain, and your enemies will eat it, which means that the land will not work for you. It'll work for someone else, although it won't really work for them either, but we'll see what happens. Now, what Nachmanides did, 12th century, what Nachmanides did, the Rambam, right, which stands for our day school, right, is Rabbi Moses ben Maimon. Ramban, ending in an N, is Rabbi Moses ben Nachman. No relation, but pretty similar name. They both came from Spain. Nachmanides was about 80 years later than Maimonides. You know what Ides means? Son of. Nachmanides, the son of Nachman. Maimonides, the son of Maimon. I think I told you the story one time. We were at Maimonides' grave in Tiberias, and over to the side, his father's buried. So he said, "This is the grave of Maimonides." So I said, "Well, who's that?" He said, "That's Maimon." I don't know, but
You had to be there.
yeah, I don't know. It's like, no, wait, that's not the whole thing. Someone said, "That's his." So who's buried over there? That's his father. Who's his father? That's Maimon. I don't know. I mean, because my mom, I forget. So it was funny at the time. All right. So look at the Ramban, the first one. Now, this is about to be really cool. This is about to be really cool because Nachmani is going to explain the Torah for you and show you how a prediction comes true. Now, remember what I told you. There's some slight differences between all the horrible things that are going to happen to you here in Leviticus and all the horrible things that are going to happen to you in Deuteronomy. And what Nachmanides says is, when I look at those slight differences, I learn something. Clear so far? Okay. Bobby, would you mind reading? Into the mic? Know and understand.
No one understands that these oaths stated in this section allude to the first exile, the Babylonian exile following the destruction of the first temple. For it is with reference to the first temple that all the words of this covenant concerning the exile and the redemption therefrom apply.
Okay, yeah, one more paragraph.
And it was in the times of the first temple that they worshipped idols and did all of the evil things, thus warning them that he will remove from them his sanctuary and the acceptance of the offerings which were favorable to him in that sanctuary, and the punishments which were to follow upon them were the sword, wild beast, pestilence, famine, and finally exile. And all of these things occurred then at the destruction of the first temple, as is clearly stated in the book of Jeremiah.
Okay, so Nachmanides says, wow, when I look at the explanation of what's going to happen to you in Bechukotai, in our Torah portion, and then I look at Jeremiah. Jeremiah was the prophet who lived when the first temple was destroyed, who explains in the book of Jeremiah what happened when the first temple was destroyed. I see that the differences in Bechukotai compared to Kitavo at Deuteronomy, the differences reflect what happened when the first temple was destroyed. And so what Nachmanides is telling you here is the Torah in Bechukotai, when it talks about all the horrible things that happens, is predicting the destruction of the first temple. Now, how many admonitions are there? How many times do we have the admonitions in the Torah? Two. How many temples were destroyed? Two. Guess what the one in Deuteronomy refers to? Right. What Nachmanides is telling you is, if you look at the slight differences, the mentionings of all the horrible things that are going to happen here in Leviticus are a prediction of the destruction of the first temple. And when you go to Deuteronomy and you look at all the slight differences, it's a prediction of the destruction of the second temple. Okay, now how? What do you mean by that? So now let's go back to what Bobby just read. If we look in the second paragraph, well, we know from Jeremiah that the reason the first temple was destroyed was because of... No, that's the second temple. Idol worship. Right, idol worship. We know from the Talmud that the reason that the second temple was destroyed is because of what we call sinat chinam, Jews fighting with each other, or what we call baseless hatred. But the first one was because of idols. So, look what it says here, that they worshipped... So it said in the second paragraph here of what we just read, the second line, or the last word on the first line, thus warning them that he will remove from them his sanctuary and the acceptance of offerings which were favorable to him in that sanctuary. That only happened in the first temple and not the second temple. The first temple and the second temple were different, because in the first temple, God's presence was there. And how do we know that? Because when they put the animal on top of the altar, a fire from heaven would come down and consume the animal, according to the Bible. But in the second temple, that didn't happen. There was no fire. In the first temple, the Ark of the Covenant and the Ten Commandments were in the first temple. The second temple, they weren't there. We lost them after the first temple and never got them back. I mean, I know where they are. I did that class. Right? If you did that lunch, you came to that lunch and learned, you know where the Ten Commandments and the Ark of the Covenant are too. You, me, and Harrison Ford. But they weren't in the second temple. So what Nachmanides is saying is, wow, look what it says. In the first temple, he's going to remove from them the sanctuary and the acceptance of offerings. That didn't happen in the second temple. He couldn't remove them because that never happened anyway. So Nachmanides is arguing that this is a reference to the first temple. And then he says, look, the punishments were to follow upon them were as follows. The sword, I mean, this sounds like the Passover 10 Commandments, right? The sword, the wild beast, pestilence, famine, and exile. And he says, wow, that's what Leviticus predicts? Well, who explained what happened in the first temple? Jeremiah. So look down below. I brought you the verse, Jeremiah 32:24. Here are the siege mounds raised against the city to storm it. And the city, because of sword, famine, and pestilence, is at the mercy of the Chaldeans. Chaldeans are Babylonians, who are attacking it. What you threatened has come to pass, as you see. And so Nachmanides says, oh my goodness, Leviticus uses the exact same phrases, the exact same ideas, and idol worship that were the reason for the destruction and the causes of the destruction of the first temple. And so everything here in Leviticus is a reference to what's going to happen when the first temple is destroyed, according to Nachmanides. That's what we have so far. Also, Chronicles, the last book in the Tanakh, it gives a little more, because it also talks about the destruction of Babylonia, or the Babylonian destruction. So it says, and those that had escaped from the sword, he carried away to Babylon, and they were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of God by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had been paid for her Sabbaths. For all these days she lay desolate, she kept Shabbat until 70 were complete. We'll come to that later. We'll tie it back to Shemitah at the end. Okay, but all I want to say so far is that according to Nachmanides' exposition, which has stood the test of time, people generally still agree with this, that, and he wrote this 800 years ago, that the retributions in Leviticus refer to the first temple. It's a prediction. And modern scholars love it the most because they date the writing of the Torah later and say, yeah, see, we told you because we were there. But like you, I'm not into that. All right, it's a joke. All right, now there's a lot more to this Nachmanides. I just cut and pasted a few pieces of it. But if you come now to the bottom, where it says, if you examine further. Dan, would you mind reading? This one should work. Yeah, if you examine, the bottom of the page.
If you examine further the subject of the redemption from it, the Babylonian exile, you see that he only assures Israel that he will remember the covenant of the fathers and of the remembrance of the land, but not that he will forgive their iniquity and their sin, and that he will once again love them as of old, nor that he will gather together those of them who are dispersed.
Okay, so in other words, what Nachmanides is saying, and you'll notice this is a continuation of his commentary on the same verse that we started at the top, 26:16. If we went through closely through Bechukotai, what you'll see is God says, I'm going to redeem you at the end because I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. That's why I'm going to redeem you. But he does not say, I'm going to redeem you because you repented or did anything to deserve it. It's just I made this promise and I'm stuck with it. Okay.
For such indeed happened when they came up from Babylon. For only the tribes of Judah and Benjamin returned together with a small group of Levites who were with them, and some of the other tribes that had been exiled to Babylon. And they returned in poverty and in servitude to the kings of Persia. Nor does he state that they will return to him in complete repentance, but only that they shall confess their iniquity and the iniquities of their fathers.
Okay, so now what's so fascinating about this? And again, we're not looking very closely at the verses in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, so you just have to take my word for it now. But later you can go back and see that I was right, because I'm quoting Nachmanides, who's pretty much always right, except when he's wrong. In Leviticus, God says, I'm going to bring you back because of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But in Deuteronomy, he says, I'm going to bring you back because you've repented, and I'm going to gather you from the four corners of the earth, meaning I'm going to bring all the Jews back. But in the second, when they came back to build the second temple, not all the Jews came back. If you read through the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, you'll see that only a few Jews came back. And as Nachmanides said here, the only Jews who were left were Judah, Benjamin, and some Levites. Which means to say that he didn't gather all the Jews from the four corners of the earth, but he didn't promise that he would do that in Leviticus. He promised that later in Deuteronomy. So that's why we're thinking here, this all refers, again, this is more proof that this refers to the first temple, because when he brought them back after the destruction of the first temple, he didn't bring them all. Why didn't he bring them all? Because he didn't promise he would. He just said, I made a promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so I'm going to fulfill that. Okay, let's keep going.
However, the covenant in the book of Deuteronomy alludes to this, our present exile, and to the redemption by which we will be redeemed from it. Thus we observe first that here in the second covenant, neither the end nor the duration of the exile are alluded to, and that he did not assure us of redemption, promising that it would take place at a certain future time, as was the case with the Babylonian captivity, whose end was foretold as a definite event in our section here in Leviticus, as explained above. But he made it dependent upon our repentance. Neither did he mention among the sins for which they would be exiled that they would make any Asherim and sun images, or that they would worship any idols whatsoever.
All right, so it's a little confusing, but just...
I have no idea what that.
Oh, yeah, well, that's why I come to these classes. Yeah. I mean, I could just, email this all to you and say, go do it. Yeah. That's what they do in yeshiva. In yeshiva, you go to the room and you see a bunch of sources on the wall, and the teacher says, "Go read them." So you go find, if you can even find them, and you read them, and then you come back and he tells you why you don't understand them. Well, that's yeshiva.
You could have cut the short.
Okay, so what does this mean? In Leviticus, we're told. Well, sorry. In the destruction of the first temple, we're told how long we're going to be in exile. In the Deuteronomy one, we're not. So, when the first temple was destroyed and the Jews went to Babylonia as slaves, they were told how long they would be slaves. When the second temple was destroyed by the Romans, we're still waiting for the third temple to be rebuilt. It was endless. Now, the first temple, we knew how long we were going to be slaves. I'll tell you how we knew that in a second. But the second temple, we were never told how long we were going to be slaves or how long we were going to be in exile. And here in Leviticus, we're told it's going to be for a certain finite period of time. But in Deuteronomy, we're told not till all the Jews around the world repent and everything, and only then, which could be forever, only then are we all going to come back. So it's more proof that the first ones here in Leviticus refer to the first temple, and the second ones refer to the second temple. Now, where is it? How do we know how long we're going to be slaves in Babylonia? Because of a prophecy of Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10. Says it's going to be 70 years.
God said 7 times. He's going to punish you 7 times, which means it's only 7 years.
Okay, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. I don't want you to steal my thunder. I still have 26 minutes. But Jeremiah predicts that, now, by the way, Jeremiah makes the prediction before the Babylonians even destroy the temple. And what happens 70 years after the Jews are slaves in Babylonia? Darius is born. Who's Darius? The son of Esther. And, well, maybe he's born 63 years after. But 7 years after that, Ahasuerus dies, and Darius becomes king, and he's allowed to revoke the decree of Ahasuerus that revoked the decree of Ahasuerus' grandfather Cyrus, because you aren't allowed to revoke a decree of a former king in his lifetime. But when Ahasuerus dies, according to Persian law, when Ahasuerus dies, Darius says, Jews, You can go back to the land of Israel, which just so happens to be 70 years after they got to Babylonia. And Jeremiah made that prediction even before the Babylonians came and destroyed the first temple. Now, why did he make that prediction? Because it took several years for the Babylonians to conquer Jerusalem. But while they were on their way and while they were trying, Jeremiah says, I got a prophecy, they're going to destroy us and we're going to go for 70 years. So all of this is just a fancy way of saying that what we're referring to now in Leviticus refers to the first temple, and what we see later in Kitavo and Deuteronomy refers to the second temple, and more proof of that is that the first temple talks about a finite period of time in exile and the second period doesn't. That's a lot of words. Did anyone follow that? Yeah? You kind of with me? Yes. Yeah? All right. Took me, Bob, you use the mic.
Doesn't this somewhat tie into the Messianic age, the reconstruction of the temple?
For sure. Kind of.
And I guess I learned a long time ago, and it was wrong, that Cyrus brought us back.
So Cyrus said the Jews can go back. But Achashverosh revoked it. Achashverosh was his grandson. Then when he died and Darius, or Daryavish, became king, he reinstituted what Cyrus said. And by the way, when Cyrus said the Jews could go back, some of them started to go back, but Achashverosh stopped it. And then Darius reinstituted. All of this is in the Talmud in a tractate called Megillah. Very interesting stuff. Okay, let's go on. Stuart, would you mind reading? Do you have a mic? Second paragraph where it says, any further states?
And he further states, there among the imprecations, the Eternal will bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as the vulture swoops down, alluding to the coming upon them of the Romans, who were very far from them.
Okay, so what Nachmanides is arguing here is, if we got to Deuteronomy, what it says in Deuteronomy, one of the other differences is the enemy this time is going to come from far away. Now, Italy was a lot further away. If you live in the ancient Near East, is a lot further away than Babylonia. But not just in terms of landmass, in terms of complete culture. The Jews spoke Hebrew. The Babylonians spoke Aramaic. That's like Spanish and Portuguese. The Jews understood Aramaic. When they went to Babylonia and had to speak Aramaic, they knew how to speak it. The Talmud is written in Aramaic. Aramaic and Hebrew both come from the same family. But when the Romans came, they didn't understand what they were saying. They were selling falafel, they were trying to order spaghetti, and nobody could understand. One guy. All right. It's because they eat different foods. But if you're an Israeli and you walk through, you wouldn't. But if you walk through Syria, or you walk through Istanbul, or you walk through Iraq, you're going to find all the foods that you like. Because they eat the same stuff. Because we got most of our food traditions from them. There's a food tour you can do. There's a guy that I know named Harry. And Harry does the best food tours in Israel. Here's how you know if it's a good food tour guy. We're eating halva from the market in Machane Yehuda in Jerusalem, and he said that halva has no soul. That's the kind of statement that a real food guy, to taste the soul. But, so what do you mean by that? Well, where do they get their ingredients? Because the best dessert ingredients in Israel, everyone knows, comes from Nazareth. Really? I didn't know that. I've been to Israel 4 million times. Nazareth. Good carpentry and good dessert is from Nazareth. You can also get cheese there. If you buy multiple pieces of cheese and you bring it home for your Christian friends, you tell them you brought them cheeses of Nazareth. Christians love that. You're not going to get this in Boca. You're having a hard time here. Yeah, it's brutal. All right, so, in Nazareth, and that, area, is where the Arabs really, they're known for their desserts. And a lot of the ingredients, like if you're making kanafa or different types of things, like phyllo dough type stuff, come from that area. But the companies there package them all in Hebrew so that it doesn't look like an Arab product. And Jews all throughout Israel go to Supersol and they buy them, and they don't even recognize that a lot of their favorite products in the dessert world are coming from Arab areas. So I learned all. If you go with Harry, you're going to learn these kind of things. Can you pass the mic to Paul? Right back. I didn't mean to waste so much time on food, but
The beginning of this parsha says, "Im b'chukotai telechu," you will go, which is a strange construction, and it admonishes us or exhorts us to struggle in the study of Torah, which is what this is all, which is what you're doing for us.
Yeah.
You're helping us struggle.
and there's another hint there. Im b'chukotai. So what's b'chukotai? It means with my laws. A chok is a law. Im b'chukotai, with my laws, telechu. You go and do them. But what do we call Jewish law in Hebrew? Halacha. Im b'chukotai telechu. If you follow the halacha, if you follow Jewish law, then all these good things will happen, and if you don't, you won't. No. Don't worry, because in Reform we have halacha. We call it autonomy. All right. Some of the stuff is very funny. I don't know why it's not landing, but some of the stuff is really. All right. All right. Yeah, if Ken was here, this would be a whole different story. All right. So what we pointed out in the second paragraph here is that according to the first. According to Leviticus, the enemy is going to come from nearby, and that's Babylonia. And in the second one, the enemy is going to come from further away, and that's the Romans, and that's exactly what happened. Okay, so now we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. Such is not the case. You see that? Second word on the line.
Such is not the case concerning the words of this covenant for us, for it speaks of the time when they were exiled to Babylon and Assyria, which are near to our land, and always they were with them. And the stock of Israel comes from there. And they, the Jews, knew their language.
Right, we just said all this, but stock means, this is where Abraham's from. Abraham was from the Chaldeans, Babylonia. Okay, we know them. We're familiar with them. That's Leviticus. Okay. Please.
As it is said, speak, I pray thee, to the servants of the Aramean language, for we understand it. Similarly, the verse stating there in the book of Deuteronomy, and the Eternal shall scatter thee among all peoples, from one end of the earth unto the other, a reference to our exile today, in which we are scattered from one end of the world to the other.
Okay, so in Leviticus, it never says we're going to be scattered all over the place. In Deuteronomy, it does. In Leviticus, in the first temple, we all went to Babylonia together. Every Jew was together. But the Roman Empire was way bigger. And the Romans spread us out all over the Roman Empire. Think of the Roman Empire. Lots of different parts of Europe, parts of Asia, parts of Africa, throughout the Middle East. To this day, we're scattered all over the world because of the Romans. And Leviticus clearly says you're going to be together. And Deuteronomy clearly says you're going to be scattered all over the earth. And so Nachmanides is going point by point, showing you that all of these predictions came true. Okay?
Again, he stated there And the Eternal shall bring thee back into Egypt in ships, and this happened in our present exile, when Titus filled the ships with them captives, and it is written in the books of the Romans.
Right, so in Deuteronomy, there's a reference to you're going to go on ships all over the world. And Nachmanides says, look, the Romans even wrote about it themselves. They packed us all on ships and sent us all over the Roman Empire. And the ships aren't mentioned in Leviticus, but they are mentioned in Deuteronomy. This is crazy stuff. Okay.
Similarly, that which Scripture says there, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thy eyes shall see. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, and they shall not be thine, for they shall go into captivity. These are not references.
Okay, so I'll just explain the rest. But what he's saying here is the Babylonians took everyone as slaves. The Romans only took the young people and killed the old people. So, and that's explained there too. Okay, so there's lots of different stuff. But now, and I hope that we've, pointed out, Leviticus, first temple, Deuteronomy, second temple. What's heartwarming about this?
It kind of goes back to what you said in the beginning. They wrote it after it happened.
Maybe. I mean, some people believe that. If you become a Reform rabbi, that's what they teach you. If you become an Orthodox rabbi, it's not. If you're a conservative rabbi, you're not sure. But what's heartwarming? What's heartwarming about this? How many retributions are there? 2. How many times are we going to be exiled from the land of Israel? Twice. We're back. But there's no third exile. There's no prediction. We're never leaving. We're back for good. There's no third retribution.
I'm not sure I totally agree with that. I think that
Can you use the mic?
Scripture makes clear that when we argue or when we worship idols or then these things are going to happen. It really doesn't say just this time or just the second time. To me, those are warnings that are infinite.
So what Nachmanides would respond to that, and it's a very good point, but what he would say is if that was the case, it would only be in the Torah once. You would say, look, here's what happens. Every time you do this, here's what happens. But the fact that it's twice and that there's all these differences and that they came true, to him, you don't have to buy it. This is just what he says. Although I have a little more evidence that you might like. I personally take it as heartwarming. Because when I look at Israel surrounded by its enemies, who are bent on destroying Israel, and I want to believe that Israel will never be destroyed again, this makes me feel better. But you could call that a fairy tale.
Our track record isn't good of falling back, and we always seem to
That's
fall
true.
back once we have, the war against us unites us. As a people, we always come together, and that focuses us. But it seems that our problems arise more
Right.
when we lose our focus on something like this, and when things are kind of going along, well, we say
Right.
normally.
Well, you're looking at it pragmatically. That's not my strength. I'm trying to live in a fairy tale world here. I'm trying to live in, pragmatically, everything you say makes sense. However, if you're looking at there's a lot of proof. I'm reading a really great book now on Rav Kook. So Rav Kook was the first chief Ashkenazic rabbi in Israel. Actually, the rabbi, my great-grandfather was actually got his smicha, was ordained by him in 1927 in Palestine. But Rav Kook was the leader of the Orthodox movement who accepted Zionism. Or he's one of them, but he was the main one. And for him to, after 2,000 years of the Orthodox world rejecting the idea of Zionism and saying we can't go back to Israel until God brings us back, what he had to see in order to do that was that all the predictions of the Bible came true. The Jews return. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. One of them is the land coming back and being rejuvenated. And all these things convinced him. By the way, he started a movement. That movement today is called religious Zionism. And that's who the settlers are. That's who Ben Gvir and Smotrich are. That's who Naftali Bennett. You can be from them and not be crazy like Naftali Bennett, or you can be from them and be crazy like Ben Gvir. But this is a movement that was sprouted, and it all comes from Rav Kook. And his idea was, I see now in the third Commonwealth, meaning the state of Israel, predictions that are all the biblical predictions of the Jews going back that had never been before. And so if I lived 200 years ago, I wouldn't be into this, but now, wow, look what's happening. Soloveitchik said the same thing in a book called Kol Dodi Dofek, which is really just an idea he had that he went and wrote and became a book. He explains how, wow, look how everything's happening. This is the seeds of the Messianic era. I mean, you could take it or leave it, but this is why you can be Orthodox today and be a Zionist. There are plenty of Orthodox who don't buy that. They're really annoying because they're anti-Zionists. They drive us crazy. Okay, we're running out of time, so let me just finish this off. Down to the bottom, similarly. Okay, so the bottom paragraph here. Similarly, this is still Nachmanides, that which he stated, and your enemies that shall dwell therein shall be desolate in it constitutes a good tiding, proclaiming that during our exiles, our land will not accept our enemies. This is also a great proof and assurance to us, for in the whole inhabited part of the world, one cannot find such a good and large land, which was always lived in, and yet is as ruined as it is today. For since the time that we left it, it has not accepted any nation or people, and they all try to settle in it, but to no avail. Now, Nachmanides lived in the 1200s. Nachmanides, at the end of his life, made Aliyah to Israel. The synagogue that he founded is still there. Beit Knesset HaRamban. In the Old City, in Jerusalem. Nachmanides got to Jerusalem after dreaming about going there his whole life, and he came and said, this place is disgusting. I can't get a minyan. There's no Jews here. Anyone who's lived here has not done well here. Nobody's turned the land into anything. No one's used it for any good. It's terrible. And it's ironic because it's the most beautiful land. It's the land flowing with milk and honey. But look at it. It's disgusting. And you know who said the same thing? Mark Twain. So if you look on the next page, in his book, The Innocents Abroad, I think it's 1860-something, 62, 63. Of all the land, so Mark Twain he did a tour of the Middle East, like a book tour. You try to sell books. Right? Of all the lands there are for dismal scenery, I think Palestine must be the prince. Can the curse of the deity beautify a land? Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes. Over it broods the spell of a curse that has withered its field and fettered its energies. And when King David was there, the Talmud says, you've never seen beauty unless you've seen Jerusalem. When the Jews are in charge, wow, it's beautiful. But at any other time, the land has not produced for anyone else. Just hasn't. It's amazing. And that's what the Torah says. Okay. Now, just to wrap this up, and hopefully I'll show you something very cool here. So the first time, in the Talmud here, this is from the Tractate of Yoma, page 9b in the Talmud, we had this famous line of why the two temples were destroyed. We know the first one's destroyed by idol worship because of the Jews were worshiping idols, and the second temple was destroyed because we hated each other. All right, and that's what it says here. I mean, you can just read it, but so it says, it was destroyed due to the fact that there were three matters that existed in the first temple: idol worship, along with, these are the three cardinal sins. There was murder, there was idol worship, and there was sexual immorality. But then in the second temple, last paragraph here, however, considering that the people during the second temple period were engaged in Torah study, observance of mitzvot, and acts of kindness, and they did not perform the sinful acts of the first temple, so why was the second temple destroyed? They didn't worship idols, they were worshiping God. Well, it was destroyed due to the fact that there was wanton hatred during that period. They didn't treat each other with respect. And that comes to teach you that when we don't treat each other with respect, that's equal to idol worship, murder, and sexual immorality. That's as bad as the three cardinal sins, is for Jews to treat each other horribly. Okay, now, here's the point I want to make. We started off by saying that last week's Torah portion was called Bahar, and it was all about Shemitah and Yovel, leaving the land grow fallow every seventh year, which means that the land has to have Shabbat. Okay. And right after we learn about the land having Shabbat, we come to, well, if you don't use the land right, it's not going to rain, and you're going to get sick, and your enemies are going to come, and all these horrible things are going to happen to you. Which means to say, if you don't use the land right, you'll be punished. And that's the real sin, is not using the land the right way. So other people will come, but it won't work for them. The land won't work for them because they don't understand how to use it. Because unless you're using a Torah system, the land won't respond. And unless you're making the right sacrifices in the Holy Temple, the land won't respond. And unless you're leaving the corners of the fields, the land won't respond. And they're not going to get it. And that's what happened. Whenever non-Jews throughout history came to the land of Israel, it didn't work for them, and the land was garbage. Comes Jeremiah and says, in 70 years you're going to go free. Why 70 years? So if you do the calculation, from the time that King Saul started the sovereignty of the Jewish people in Israel, the first king, King Saul, from the time of King Saul until the first temple was destroyed. And you can do this calculation in the Tanakh. I mean, you can count the years of how people lived, and you can see what year they lived in. But from King Saul to the destruction of the first temple in 586 BCE, there were 490 years. Which means that there were 70 Shemitahs that should have been, that weren't observed the right way. And so God says, wait, hold on. No, there were 7. Wait, 7. Yeah, 7 times. So now you need to go into exile for 70 years so that the land can lay fallow. You missed 70 Shemitah years. You didn't do it right. Because every 7th year of Shemitah, you didn't do it right. So the land is 70 years behind. So if you Jews leave the land for 70 years, the land will remain fallow for 70 years. And then things will grow, then the land will be ready for you again, and you can come back. And it just so happened that in that 70th year, Darius told the Jews they could go back, and Ezra led the Jews back, and they came back and reinstituted Shemitah. And they came back. And so the 70 years for the first temple was in every way our punishment that we see here in Bechukotai for what we didn't do in last week's Torah portion, which was the Shemitah, and the two are connected. Bahar Bechukotai. Now, here's what I'll tell you, and this is why this is very interesting today. You know, if you go over to our library, there's a book called The New Anti-Semitism. And someone writes that book every 30 years. Look, you can look in any generation, there's the new anti-Semitism. There's the anti-Semitism when they hated us because we were poor. There's the anti-Semitism they hated us because we were rich. There's the anti-Semitism they hated us because we were capitalists. There's the anti-Semitism because they hated us because we're communists. There's the anti-Semitism they hated us when we had no land. There's the anti-Semitism they hated us when we have land. Whatever you want. Whatever we are at the time, you can hate us for it. And it gives someone a reason to write that book. So now the the claim is that we're colonialists. Now, meanwhile, everybody is praising indigenous people. You can't go to a college campus without someone saying, before we begin, I want to recognize that this is Native American land. We're not giving it back to them. We gave them a casino, but we're not giving them this. But I just want you to know this is their land. Everyone all of a sudden loves indigenous people. You want to go back to your original land? We love it. Unless you're Jewish. Unless you came from that land. Unless everything about your being is that land. There has never been a people in history who are more connected to their land and are least colonial than the Jewish people. You can't do the religion. You can't do who we are. You can't be a people without the land. And that's why when we were on our way a few Torah portions ago in Emor, God said, you're going to have this holiday called Shavuot, you're going to have this holiday called Pesach, you're going to have this holiday called Sukkot. They seemingly have nothing to do with the land. They're all agricultural. And you can only do them the right way in the land because everything about the mitzvahs and everything that you do is 100% connected to the land of Israel. There's never been in history a people who've been more connected to a land than the Jews are to Israel, spiritually, physically, in every single way. And so you call us colonialists, and then you look at the map and you see how many different lands are controlled by Christianity, and how many different lands are controlled by Islam, and how many different lands are controlled by Hinduism and Buddhism, and how many little lands are controlled by Judaism. This tiny, you can't even see it on a map. And we're the colonialists. Now, there's only been one time in history of the Jewish people where the Jewish people were the dominant superpower. There's only been one time in history. It was only 80 years. It was from King David's reign for 40 years to King Solomon's reign for 40 years, and that was it. And during those 80 years, it was illegal to convert to Judaism. Think about it. It was illegal to convert to Judaism because they couldn't tell if you were converting because you wanted to be a first-class citizen and be part of the superpower, or if you were really wanted to be Jewish because you loved God and wanted to do the mitzvahs. So they outlawed conversion. It's in the Mishnah. You couldn't do it. Why? Because we were anti-colonialist. We didn't want any other land. We didn't want any other people. We just wanted to be our people on our land. And that's all we've ever wanted. And the entire point of the Torah is to show you. And that's why there's these two different talks about the exile and what caused the exile and what we need to go back and what the purpose of going back is. The entire purpose of the whole Torah is to show you that you can't really be Jewish without the land. You can do your best. But this isn't ideal Judaism. Ideal Judaism is that you have the four corners of your field and you leave the corners. But you could do that here, but it's not a mitzvah. I mean, it's a mitzvah, but it's a mitzvah of charity, but it's not the mitzvah of leaving your corners of a field because that only applies to the land of Israel. The mitzvahs were only meant to be for the land of Israel. We were never meant to be here. Now, if we have to be in the exile, it's good to be in South Florida. I mean, we could be in, Wisconsin or somewhere cold or somewhere terrible. But, so, it's nice that we're here, but we weren't meant to be here. We're meant to be, and so what Deuteronomy says is, I don't know when it is that you're all going to come back, but someday it's going to happen, and you need to be ready for it. On the other hand, the Zionists said, good news. We're not all back yet, but we started to plant the seeds, and we're on our way. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
Probably saw it before, but there's this beautiful play of words. Halkan, Yashan, Nosham, Bayashan. I like to see it 3 times. Yashan, Nosham, Bayashan. The Nosham is long store. that means that something old is something that's been stored for a while. Right?
Yeah.
But it's beautiful, but you don't pick it up in the English, all the three words together. Isn't it beautiful?
There's a wine called Yashan Moshan.
Oh, really? I didn't know. Yashan Noshan, so they store it for a while, or what? They got the name from here.
They got the
probably.
name from there.
Yeah, I didn't know. That's good. I wonder where you can get it. Can you get it here? Where do you get it? Total wine?
And any place in New York that's a kosher wine place.
What kind of wine is it? Red?
It's a red sweet wine.
Red wine? So like for Seder or Shabbat? Oh, so it's not a gourmet wine. That's pretty cool. All right. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Test 1 2.